Well, hello. This is Martin and Carolyn Forte with Excellence in Education, and we are doing a series of YouTube videos. In fact, we hope that you enjoy these videos so much that you want to subscribe to our channel. We are a homeschooling-oriented channel. We have successfully homeschooled our kids, and now we want to show you some ideas as to how you can successfully have a good homeschool adventure on your own. And today is the first of a series of curriculum and teaching styles. So, Miss Carolyn, what are we doing today?
Well, today we're interviewing Jan Mc Grath, who is going to explain how she used the Charlotte Mason method for the last 10 years or so, teaching her sons. I think you'll find her story very encouraging and inspiring.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's get into it. Again, please subscribe below if you enjoy our series. And now let's get on to our wonderful interview with Miss Jan Mc Grath.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Forte from EIE, and I'm very excited today to introduce you to our guest, Jan Mc Grath, homeschool mom.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. I wouldn't have started homeschooling if it hadn't been for you folks at EIE.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now Jan is going to explain to us the way she homeschools. And so Jan, how did you come to choose homeschooling?
I actually resisted it quite a bit. I didn't want to homeschool. And I had, fortunately, some resources, obviously EIE, and I talked to veteran homeschoolers that have done this, and they still had their hair intact, so I knew it was doable. And I had the support of my husband, and that was key. And I just knew that we could try it for a year and see what happens, and knowing that I had that flexibility made it easier, yeah.
Yes, and I think a lot of people enter into homeschooling that way.
Yeah.
Do you use any particular curriculum?
Well, I follow a Charlotte Mason philosophy towards education, and it's not a curriculum per se. It's kind of a philosophy towards how you approach home teaching.
I see. So can you describe this? Who is Charlotte Mason?
Well, Charlotte Mason is a British educator, and she had talked about education much like food for a person. You present a feast of ideas, and you allow your child to pick from whatever they are interested in. But your job is to spread the feast. And that could be subjects from poetry to nature studies, composer studies, math, grammar, science, you name it.
So your job is to present the possibilities.
Yes, and you present a variety of subjects, and through living books. That's the key, through living books.
Okay, so nail that down. What does living books mean?
Living books are books that are authored in a way that touches the imagination, reaches that person, and you're not just reading it for facts and information. You are actually impacted by the characters that are in the book, and they can be touching on different subjects. So for today, I have some books that I have that are available here at EIE as well. Little House in the Big Woods, okay? And this book is a history book about westward expansion. And it is a story about a family, as we all know, I believe, and it is so fascinating. But you don't get introduced to the history lesson by dates and key figures. the children just want you to read the next chapter and the next chapter, and you know that's a living book because they are so fascinated by what happens.
They're engaged with the story.
Absolutely, absolutely. So and we consider this a history book and a literary book.
Sure.
So it's
both.
It's both, and you kind of like get two birds with one stone. You know, it's a book that's meaningful to them, and we just have this in our home and we love it.
And if I remember correctly, I think there's a little science in there too.
Absolutely. There's even math in there. There's in their series, The Long Winter, they talk about how they had to conserve their grain, and they had to figure out how to get to the depot from their prairie to collect their food, and just the trade at the general store. It was very fascinating to my children. Yeah.
It is. That sounds very interesting and exciting. Now, but is it hard to implement as Charlotte Mason education?
It isn't. I'm surprised because, one of my resistance to home education is I thought I needed to know it all, and you don't. It's actually quite the contrary. You get to learn with your child, either reading aloud or having them read the book themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, this book here is a book called Whatever Happened to Penny Candy. This is an economics book. It's fascinating, and it's not the economics book that I had received when I had an education. I had a textbook. And so these books are either read to my children or they read on their own, and then they tell back to me what they have taken in. Just like a feast at the table, you pick the food that you want to eat, the children pick what they have observed, and they tell back through a narration, orally or written, and that is the work of their education right there.
So they tell you what they have learned, what they have gained from the book. Do you then evaluate what they tell you? Like a test. Do you want to keep a record of how much you think they got out of it?
So at the end of a term or a quarter, we have what I call an exam week. And what that means is that each journal, we have a journal collected based on subjects. So math journal, science journal, a geography journal. And in that week, they are asked a question. For example, I will ask them, tell me something about westward expansion. Tell me all that you know. And they have to now trace back for over a course of 11 weeks all that they recall of what we had read. And it could be anything.
Wow.
And the key is that they are able to tell or write it clearly and sensibly and kind of almost defend or support their position. And you want to hear about writing, how much they're writing and how much they have to think through all of what they recall. It's amazing. It's a very difficult task, but it's amazing how your children rises to that moment when they share what they know.
So, how do you begin? How do you implement a Charlotte Mason education?
Well, it's quite simple. If you take it week by week, little at a time. So, for example, if you have right now a traditional approach to home education, textbooks and workbooks, but you want to kind of jump into it, one thing you can do is introduce something like a composer study. So this book, The Gift of Music, also available here, is a wonderful book, to introduce your children, a living book, to different composers, from Beethoven to Mozart. And you can read about it for 10 minutes. You don't have to finish a chapter. I used to remember I had to read a chapter and finish the chapter. No, you keep it short, so it may be a 10-minute read. Your child then tells you everything that they know, or they write it in their history journal, because this is history, and then you put it away, and then maybe the following week, and you do it once a week, that you can listen to a famous work from that composer that you studied. So with Beethoven, we listened to a portion of the Fifth Symphony, and we did it for 10 minutes. And you can be listening to it while you're preparing meals, doing your chores, whatever. You're not, it's not a formal moment where you're actually saying, well, Beethoven was born in this place. You're not doing that. You did it through the living book.
Yeah. Okay. So, depending on the child's age, you could have a picture book about Beethoven, or this would be for a little bit older. Although even the younger ones, if you're just reading it to the child.
That's right. The key is that the books are not what Charlotte Mason says, twaddle. You're not bringing books that have ginormous pictures, and they can take it in, just like a feast at the table. She said, Charlotte Mason, that think of a child that has come into this world. They have the ability to, they have a stomach. They can digest their food, whether it's mother's milk or solids, right? You do not have to chew the food for them. And the same with books. If you give them a living book, they will take in what they need to know or can. They have the functions. They are not an empty vessel. They are not a blank slate. They will take in what they need to know from the feast that you present.
So you don't have, it sounds like you don't have to be terribly concerned about this book is written on a 5th grade level, this book is written on a 10th grade level, things like that.
That's right. In fact, sometimes you'd be surprised what your younger siblings may pick up that maybe the older siblings did not take in. And the exchange that happens through a narration, the telling back, is always very interesting, because you get a peek into the mind of your children. The work of their education is revealed in that telling back. And so I have read books about by the Lambs about Shakespeare, and I will read it aloud. So they may be noodling around, wiggling their bodies, and when the moment comes to tell back, it is amazing to me what the younger one may pick up that the older one did not pick up, or the other way around.
Interesting. That's true. They're all different.
They are all different.
And they're all going to zone in on different things, and it sounds like you don't really worry about that.
No, my key interest is not so much of them knowing facts and information. My key goal is that they care about what they care about. Okay. And if you are presenting a rich education, the best books possible of literary work, living books, let them meet mind to mind with the author, the composer, the artist, the science that's outside through their nature walks, and whatever is out there in a field trip. Let them tell you what they've taken in. The teacher or the mother does not have to be the showman. You are not center stage. You are quietly observing your child and you guide them gently, but you are not the one, the know-all and the be-all.
So you don't have to provide the questions at the end of the chapter. In other words, you allow the child to ask his own questions.
That's right. They having to tell you back. For example, we were reading about the Panama Canal today, and it amazed me that each child told back to me some things that were similar, and rather some things that were quite different. And the conversation is not about who didn't know what they should have known. It is about what they cared and what they took from that feast, that living idea book that we were reading about the Panama Canal.
It sounds like those are things that will stick.
That's right. If you care, it will stick, and it will be meaningful. It would be a meaningful education.
So people might ask, is a Charlotte Mason education rigorous enough to prepare them for high school and beyond?
Absolutely. Because nowhere, I believe, you would have such a variety, a feast, a liberal arts, a humanities education as vast as this. You would be providing them, as in today, my sons were reading and reciting to me a poem by Percy Shelley. And then we actually used the poem to use that as part of their spelling, where they actually had to study the first stanza, and then we closed the book, and then I dictated to them. That meant that they had to carefully observe not only the punctuation, what letters were capitalized, and so forth. And if you do these short lessons, and that's the other key, living books, short lessons, in our case, outside of math being one of the longer subjects, 45 minutes, many of them are under that timetable. So 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And it's not about finishing the chapter. It's not about finishing the book. It is about making sure that you are giving them short and small lessons, and they taking in what they can take in, and then building upon that year after year, week after week, day after day. And you'd be surprised what they recall and what they retain. And consequently, they are prepared for higher education and for life, because they become lifelong learners. You haven't destroyed their hunger to learn, because you've provided that feast, and you've given them that liberty to take in that which they could take in.
That sounds wonderful. Does this take a lot of planning and preparation on your part?
It does take a little planning, in the sense that I spend usually about 10 minutes the night before to kind of lay out some of my books, maybe 5 minutes, even that. But that helps me in the day, so that those short lessons are stacked one after the other. There is a break, and hopefully we're done by lunchtime.
Wow.
Or a little bit after lunch.
Very good, very good. Now, what about movement, variety? It's not all sitting at a table, I don't think.
That is so true, because it is an atmosphere, it is a lifestyle, it's a discipline. And one of the biggest pieces of this is not only short lessons, as well as the experiences that you provide them. And so whether it be chores around the house, cooking, gardening, it's also the field trips. We have signed up for so many field trips. That experiential learning, again, that feast that you are providing for them, and them taking in what they can take in. My son went to an opera at the Dorothy Chandler, and they went with the EIE field trip. And this morning, my older one said, "That's from Carmen," because the radio was on, and he heard the music, and he said, "I believe that it was about a story about a bullfighter and a cigar tobacco worker." And he was just trying to piece the story together, but the song stayed with him, and that he was able to recall was pretty impressive. And
yes, I'd say so.
I thought that was not only a memory for him, but it probably was meaningful to him in some way. But if I hadn't allowed him that experience to go to a field trip, to move his body, to get out, and that's what is the beauty of Charlotte Mason's education, because it's not the whole of your day sitting at home. You want to be done, or at least our goal is to be done by lunch or a little bit after lunch, so that the rest of the day they can explore. My children noodle around in the garage. It's basically a tool shed. They've built so many things that I quite frankly didn't know that it would actually work, but they have so much fun, and they just, there's a lot of stuff that it's been a memory for them. They built boats, they built a boat, they built a chest, they built a pinball machine, and this was all just because we have laid the atmosphere, the tools there for them to use safely. My other one loves art, so we've had tempera paints laying about, paint brushes. It's not a formal art lesson. They get to create what they want to create. And so, to answer you, is it a lot of seat work? I know we want them to be moving their bodies, taking in those field trips. In fact, sometimes 2 weeks ago we were playing a game called Jingo, and it was our composer study. It was basically a bingo game, and yes, we read the living book, but I thought to change it up just by having a game, and it was something that they can learn and had some fun.
Yes, games are a really good way to enhance learning.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, do you have any final words for moms?
I just don't do what I did in the outset. I tried to make school at home at first, and I realized that the key is to keep it simple, know your children, and make sure you have a philosophy that you are comfortable with. In our case, it's the Charlotte Mason education, and having a philosophy is so critical because you're not prone to go from one fad or one curriculum to the next. You're anchored, and you know why you're doing what you're doing, and you're more likely to stay the course. And if you are behind that philosophy, then now you know how to pick your math. You know what kind of living books you want at your home. And I think the other piece of it is to know that it is a sacrifice, know that it isn't that you have to know it all, and that there are people there that can support you. And I used to work a 9-to-5 job, and as soon as I resigned, somebody else filled my job. But with a mom, once you decide not to show up, it's hard to find a replacement. There's no one like you. There's only you. And no one's going to love your children as much as you do.
No.
And so I would just pray and, again, keep it simple.
Well, thank you, Jan. I think this really gives people a good exposure to a wonderful style of homeschooling that promotes a love of learning.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you.
Well, Carolyn, what an interview. That was awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It was wonderful, and I learned a lot, even after all our experience with homeschooling all these years.
Yeah, I mean, we've been involved in homeschooling now for 30 plus years. So, and we did partly Charlotte Mason, but both of us, I think, learned something from this. It was great. What I picked up on, which I thought was great, was her concept of the feast. That you don't have to eat it all at one time. You can pick what you want from the feast. And the variety of the feast and the application of picking up what you're interested in at that particular time is so great. that was my big pickup.
Yeah, I really like that. Another thing that this interview is going to show people is that there are many ways to do a Charlotte Mason education approach.
Yeah.
It's very flexible. A lot of people are using a Charlotte Mason formula that they find online, and they're doing what's being recommended, and those things are all great. But it's really nice to see how a family is doing it to fit their family, to fit their lifestyle,
Yeah.
to fit their interests. I love that she talked about following her son's interest. So there's an awful lot to learn here.
Well, again, fantastic interview. I'm looking forward to our future interviews with different homeschool parents who are using different styles. And I hope that you've enjoyed it. And I hope you come back and listen to our future films. Thank you very much for listening.